how are we? You're very welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing very well. It's absolutely miserable here in Ireland this morning. Grey skies, misty rain. It's the full Irish October experience, really. We're on the run up to Halloween, and there's that familiar autumnal scent in the air. I don't know if you feel it where you are, but here in Ireland, the change in the season is almost tangible. There's a smell, a kind of earthy nostalgia that comes with the shift in weather, and I think Halloween captures that perfectly. Halloween, of course, comes from the old Celtic or Celtic festival, Samhain, which marks the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. But also, it's known as the meeting point between the world of the living and the dead. That's what makes this time of year so fascinating. It's kind of a mix of change, memory, and mystery. So let's get into today's story. Today we're heading west to Galway, a vibrant port city on Ireland's Atlantic coast. Historically, Galway was a major trading hub full of ships coming and going between Ireland and many countries, in particular Spain and Portugal. You can still feel those international roots in the city's streets and culture today. I highly recommend Galway if you're visiting Ireland. It's very multicultural and it just has a wonderful feeling about the place. I don't think there's anywhere else like Galway, and I just highly recommend it. And this brings us to one of the most famous Irish legends, which is said to have taken place there, the story of the Lynch family. Now, this tale supposedly dates back to 1493. It centers around the mayor of Galway at the time, a man named James Lynch, and his son, Walter. The story goes that Galway's mayor had strong trading ties with Spain. One version of this myth says that a Spanish merchant who had previously hosted Lynch sent his son Gomez to stay with the Lynch family, something like an early form of the Erasmus, I guess. Another version claims Gomez was simply a Spanish sailor who found himself in Galway for a period of time. Either way, Gomez and Walter became friends. Gomez was charming, foreign, and exotic, a bit of a celebrity in Galway at the time. Remember, this was the 1400s. A Spaniard walking the streets of a small Irish port town would have been quite the novelty. But then things got complicated, and Walter had a girlfriend, a young woman he was courting, which is an old way to say wooing, which is an old way to say he was trying to start a relationship or they were in the early stages of a relationship with marriage as the objective. Anyway, he became convinced that she was infatuated with Gomez. It appears that the young woman's father invited Gomez to dinner to show hospitality to the young man in a foreign land. Now, Walter saw Gomez leaving the house after the meal, and jealousy took over. Convinced of this betrayal, Walter flies into a rage and stabs Gomez down by the water and tosses him into the ocean. The following day, the body is found, and all eyes are on Walter. The mayor is faced with a dilemma. The mayor, Walter's father, suddenly found himself trapped between politics and parenthood. He had a dead Spaniard in his town and a son guilty of murder. To preserve peace and protect Galway's international trade relations, the mayor made an unthinkable decision. He sentenced his own son to death. According to the legend, he personally carried out the execution, hanging Walter from the window of their home. If you visit Galway today, you can still see what's known as Lynch's window, said to be the exact window where it happened. Now, in reality, this myth is said to have taken place in the late 1400s, and the story only surfaces around 200 years later in written accounts. The validity of the story is doubtful, and there is a window that you can visit, which is not where the original Lynch house was, but I think it's on Market Street. If you Google Lynch's window, anyway, you'll find it and be able to visit it if you do go to Galway. This also leads to another claim, which is quite intriguing. Many say this event gave rise to the English word lynch, to lynch someone, meaning to execute someone without a proper trial, usually by a mob acting as judge and jury. Now, historians argue about this. It's probably not the true linguistic origin, but as a piece of folklore, it's quite powerful. Anyway, whether the story is true or not, it still haunts Galway in a sense. The earliest written accounts don't appear until centuries later, so who knows what's fact and what's fiction. But there's something about it that feels right, or right maybe isn't the right word, but there's something about it that feels appropriate for this time of year, a story of guilt, loss, and things that don't quite rest. And speaking of things that don't quite rest, on a lighter note, there's been this YouGov survey that I'd like to finish this week's episode off with to get away from the heavy murder story, So essentially, there's been this YouGov survey. Side note, YouGov is very interesting just for English language learning because there are loads of surveys on interesting topics. I'll share all the links in any case on the description of this episode so that you can access different things in English related to Galway if you're inclined to investigate more this myth or other stories around Galway. But I'll also link this particular study. So this study focused on five categories or 5 topics and asked people if they believed in the existence of these things. So the categories were werewolves, vampires, the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie, witches with magic powers, and ghosts. And it's quite surprising, really. I don't know. It's fun. It's a funny. I don't know who responded to this directly, but in any case, we have 8% of people who think that vampires and werewolves exist, and then we have, it looks like, 12% that believe that Nessie in Scotland, the Loch Ness Monster, exists. Okay, there are some people who say, I don't know, and they're sitting on the fence, but there are quite a good percentage of people who think, okay, Loch Ness Monster, it's around. Then witches with magic powers, we're going back in time with this one, we have 21%. Wow. Okay, 1 in 5 thinks that there are witches with magic powers. And finally, and I think this is the most interesting one at this time of year, 28% of people believe that ghosts probably do exist. 38%, so almost 40%. There are some others on the fence here. It's 45. There are 45% in total would not rule it out. They're quite sure that, or they're either in the yes or the maybe camp. But yeah, that's quite significant. So I suppose on that note, it does show something fascinating. We still want to believe that the line between worlds is thin, that something might linger. Maybe it's just our way of feeling close to the people we've lost. I don't know. And sure, look, who knows? Even the wind feels different this time of year, and it's carrying a lot of memories. So I'm going to let you go on that note. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on I suppose it was a mix of history, myth, legend, and Halloween atmosphere. Take care of yourselves and have a great week. Ciao.